everybody. I want to introduce you to Chelsea Nicole. Chelsea has Little Mountain Ranch in British Columbia in Canada, and she is a homesteader. And she's going to tell us a lot more about what that means and help us kind of play along if we want. So, Chelsea, welcome.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I really appreciate you having me. Okay, so what is homesteading to me? A couple of years ago, I actually did an interesting collaboration on YouTube where I asked this question, and I had people send in responses to me from all over North America about what their definition of homesteading was. And what it really came down to, because everybody had a different idea, a slight variation, but it was on the same theme of being as self-sufficient as you can be, having some independence from food systems, and the overarching theme was independence and being able to source what you need for your day-to-day life from as much from your own land as you possibly can. And I would say that the way that I would define homesteading would be similar to that idea.
That's awesome. So, naturally, a lot of what you do revolves around food. So I'm going
Everything.
to say
Yes.
so we're growing it, we're stocking the pantry, and finally we've got to cook it. So let's start
Mhm.
with growing it. How
Okay.
much of what your family consumes during the year are you able to grow yourself?
At this point, we grow, I would say, around 50% of all the vegetables because we live in the north. So we can only grow fresh vegetables and consume fresh vegetables a couple of months out of the year. We have 110-day frost-free days of actually growing time. So it's very short. And I do preserve a lot of that throughout for the rest of the year, but we obviously want to be eating some fresh stuff in the wintertime. So I would say 50%, 100% of our meat, about 75% of our dairy because I'm a terrible cheesemaker. So I still buy cheese from the grocery store. All of our eggs, and then we don't grow any of our own grain. So we're still buying grain. So probably like 75% total we try to grow on our own land.
So once you've grown all this food, we're talking about stocking the pantry, and you said you're canning a lot of it.
Mhm.
So talk about that process. You've got this tiny growing season, and then you must have to can like crazy.
Oh, I do. So I usually start canning by the middle of summer, and I'm right in the thick of it right now. So I'm canning every day right now, and I will be all the way until mid towards the end of September. Kind of in that last 2 weeks is when I really start to slow down. I usually stock around 1,000 jars of canned products in my pantry, and that puts me through from I try not to start cracking jars in the pantry till October. My kids are always like, can we just go and open this one? And I'm like, no, wait. So from October all the way until June, we try to have enough to be able to take care of all the pickles, the canned fruit, all of the canned fruit, all of our tomato products and things like that. So I do can a lot, and it's out of necessity because of where we live. Because we have this really short growing season, I have to put that food up somewhere. So I do it, I primarily, I would say, through canning. I also have a root cellar. So all my root vegetables are stored in the root cellar, which is fantastic because it's almost like eating fresh in the middle of winter to go down to the root cellar and get some carrots or some beets or potatoes. I recently purchased a freeze dryer, so I have just started integrating freeze dried foods, and that's wonderful for herbs. It does the most gorgeous, perfect for herbs rather than dehydrating. So that's a really wonderful way. Still do a little bit of dehydrating, but not a lot. And then I have a cold storage space for things like squash that I store. So it's a big between the beginning of October or the beginning of August until the end of September. I am going full out, 14 hours a day. I
Wow.
hit the ground running first thing in the morning, and then that's it. And then that leads us into what do I do all winter then? I cook all that food. So during the summer months, we eat a lot of fresh, lots of barbecue, things like that that don't require me to be in the kitchen actually cooking because I'm doing so much food preservation. But in the winter time, all that food, something needs to be done with it all. And so I cook it and make all kinds, lots of soups and stews, really hearty, stick to your bones. We need food to keep us warm up here in the north, so that's what
Yeah.
winter is.
So I have two questions about you, kind of
Sure.
stuck in the pantry part. So first of all, what is it that is your kids' favorite that they're trying to break into the
Right
pantry and
now,
open?
right now it's raspberry jam. I made a really, really good raspberry jam. So and we have waffles and pancakes throughout the week, so they like that on their canned peaches, absolute favorite. And they're a hot commodity because they're very expensive. We can't grow peaches here, so we have to order them in from
Uh,
south of us, and the kids love them. They usually get consumed between October and December. They're all gone. It doesn't matter how many I can, they're gone within a couple months. So it's usually the fruit that they want to
okay,
get.
that's
Yeah.
well, that's good. At least they
Yeah,
have good
that's good.
taste.
Yeah, exactly.
And then for those of us who are in Texas, we don't have root cellars. We don't
Yeah.
have any kind of cellars for the most part. And
Is it because it's flat? Like, can you
it's
share
no,
me?
it's not all flat. It's just the land itself is not conducive. So some of it, for example, in southeast Texas, in Houston, the land is very kind of mushy. I mean,
Oh, oh, so
it
you have
can
a lot
move
of
a
water.
lot. And it just doesn't lend itself to basements or anything like that.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and water table is very high normally.
Mhm.
Um, this year is different, but
I know it's here too. I
yeah.
understand. Yeah.
So we rarely see anybody with a basement.
Hmm.
Um, so we don't necessarily relate to that. But the idea of having this cool storage for the potatoes and all the other things just sounds wonderful.
Hmm.
So, what recommendations do you have for people for storing things like that?
That's a really great question. I get questions like that all the time, especially for people, even apartment dwellers or people that just don't have access to cold storage like we have. So the coolest part of your house. So wherever, even it could be under a bed, it could be in the back of a closet, wherever's the coolest part of your house. If you do have enough space to be able to have a small air conditioner, I'm sure you guys all have air conditioners down there because it's so
We
darn
do.
hot, right? So if you have a space that you can block off from light, light is something that really degrades the quality of food really quickly. So you want a nice dark and as cool as possible. That's one option. Is just I have had things in boxes underneath my bed, like squash stores really, really well that way. And you just need to make sure you remember to check on it regularly so you don't end up with rotting vegetables underneath your bed. One thing though that I did see a friend of mine do is she had a fridge and took the drawers out and actually filled them with peat moss and dampened them and was able to store tons of root vegetables in there and in bins, like it was a second fridge in her house, all winter. So it mimicked basically having a root cellar. So
Nice.
yeah, so that's so yeah, and if you cannot store that way, then canning, dehydrating, all those other methods that I talked about are and freezing. Of course, freezing is an option that we have with
Yeah.
modern technology for storing stuff. I have friends that actually exclusively freeze because the nutritional value of the food is really high when you freeze. So if you have space for a big deep freeze, then that's a really good option too.
That's good to know. What would be what would people be surprised to know that you could can that that we don't think about?
Meals. So you could can a chili, a beef stew, so ready-made food. So the kind of food you're going to go to the grocery store and buy in a Campbell's can, you can any of that food at home as long as you have a pressure canner. So there's different foods that require a pressure canner. They're low acid foods, so things like meat, tomatoes if you're not adding an extra acid to them. Beans would be another example. You can do pork and beans, things like that. And a lot of people find that super convenient. I don't do that as much because I cook on such a large quantity because we have a large family that I would have to do eight jars and pull 8 jars off my pantry shelves rather than
Yeah.
ingredients, which is how I tend to preserve. But for a lot of people with smaller families, meals are something that surprises them because they kind of think of the jar of canned tomatoes or the jar of canned peaches rather than actual meals. Coleslaw
Right.
is another one that always surprises people that you can pickle and then you can drain it out and then add your mayonnaise or whatever to it. And my kids love that. I've turned a lot of people onto that idea because it's such a convenient way to have coleslaw in the middle of the winter.
That's brilliant. I
Hmm.
would never have thought of that.
I didn't either. I'm not the original keeper of that idea, so I got that from someone else.
But you're passing it along. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Um, so let's talk about cooking. Yeah. So you said in your cookbook, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you have a brand new cookbook out, and you mentioned that you are not, in fact, a lover of cooking.
I'm not.
So what happened?
I'm not. So I think a lot of it has to do with just the quantity that I have to cook all the time. So, and I've been doing that for a very long time. I've my oldest is 26 years old. So for 26 years I've been making large amounts of food. So I think part of it is boredom. Part of it is that I love being outdoors. So being outside that's where I'm happiest. So being indoors can be a little bit tedious for me. But I have found that through sharing my recipes and sharing cooking and teaching people how to cook from scratch, because I cook from scratch pretty much exclusively, cooking from food that you can either get at a farmer's market or you can grow in your own backyard, that has reinstilled in me a little bit of, I wouldn't say the love of cooking, but maybe not the disdain or the disdain of it. I'm not sure if that's too strong of a word, but it's definitely made it a lot more fun for me. And my husband was pointing out the other day, he said it's really funny that cooking is not something you love, but your entire life revolves around food. Everything you do revolves around food. And so when I told people that I was writing a cookbook, people that know me well, they thought it was the funniest thing ever. They're like, really, of all the people in the world, I cook good food, but that I would be doing something like that, people found quite funny, as did I.
Oh, you mentioned cooking from scratch. Do
Yes.
people tell you how surprised they are if they start to make the switch
Hmm.
and they're cooking more from scratch from home, especially using some of the recipes in your book? Are they surprised at the difference in the flavor just by
All the
changing these
time.
ingredients?
All the
Yeah.
time. And also that it's less difficult than people think it is. That because I think, especially in the last, say, 20 years, I think cooking from scratch and eating at home and all of that has sort of moved out of our culture in a lot of ways. And people are coming back to that in droves now, especially with inflation and all of that. Food is very expensive, and it's a lot less expensive to cook from scratch. So I think people are surprised by how much cheaper it is, surprised by that it's not that difficult. And I'm not a complicated cook. I don't use a lot of fancy ingredients or anything like that. I keep it really simple, for my own sanity, but that does really help people that are just learning. Is there's not all these fancy ingredients that you have to go try to rustle up in some special boutique grocery store somewhere. You can just get them from either your backyard or from your just local grocery store. So I think people are most surprised by all of that.
Yeah. Let's take a look. I've got your book right here.
Oh, you do?
I do. I've got it right here, and it's wonderful. You've got so many different things in here, and I know you're getting lots of great feedback on it. So, tell me what's been happening so far.
Wow, I have to say that I have been absolutely blown away by the response for it. I it's been very humbling actually, because it makes me feel a bit emotional about it. I had someone send me a picture yesterday with her 2-year-old who was like looking through the cookbook and excitedly picking out recipes, letters from people just saying how wonderful it is to have kind of an old-fashioned feel to a cookbook, and the old-fashioned recipes and ingredients and the simplicity of it. The big font, people love the fact they don't have to put their reading glasses on to read it. They can thank my mom for that. That was her idea. And yeah, it's just been so. I sold out with my pre-sales within 3 days, which was just incredible. Lots of good reviews on Amazon. It's been a wonderful experience. And I owe so much of it to you, because Elaine, everyone, helped walk me through this probably since back. When did I first contact you? Back in November or December, maybe?
I know we talked in November.
Was it
Yeah,
November? Yeah, so November
yeah,
of 2022. And she was just so fantastic. That would be one of the pieces of advice I would offer to people if they were interested in doing a project like this, is find somebody who really knows what they're doing, because it can get quite overwhelming just from learning how to compile recipes properly, learning how to write recipes properly, learning how to put it together, designing the cookbook, publishing. There's all these pieces that you don't think of when you just think of typing out a few recipes and putting them together. And so finding somebody that actually knows, incredibly helpful.
well, we were glad to be there for you because you had such a great book. to bring out.
Oh,
We just
thank
are,
you so
are glad
much.
to have had a tiny part of that. It was 99% you and one tiny
Oh,
percent us.
no, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. But yeah, and I think to find people that you can work with, that you get along with, and that you have good communication with, and all of that, because it's a very close to your heart type project, this kind of project, and having people that kind of understand that really helps too. So yeah, it's been a incredible learning experience. There's lots of things I would have done differently. I think if I could go back and start it right from the very beginning, but I feel so proud of the finished product, and just
Yes,
really happy that so
you
many
should
people
be.
are so happy with it.
Yeah. What surprised you the most when you started working on it? What was the biggest surprise throughout this journey?
Uh, Interestingly, it was connecting back to my grandma, both of my grandmothers. It was connecting to and thinking about them making these recipes and where did they get recipes from? Because a lot of recipes I use today are ones that have been passed down from my grandma and my great grandma all the way through to my mom and then to me and then now to my children. And that connection with my grandparents who have now passed, it felt, I don't know, it gave me a sense of roots that I didn't really have before because I hadn't really thought about it and I didn't dig into the stories. Like I got to hear lots of stories from my mom and my auntie and about these recipes, and that was probably the most surprising part of it that I wasn't expecting.
That's so nice because we know from experience too that every recipe has a story.
Everyone.
There's
Yeah,
somebody behind it, and they were bringing family and friends together around food, and it's making memories.
exactly. It
And that's
really
what you're
is.
doing for everybody else.
That's
Yeah,
what's so neat
they're
is that it thrills me that and I put this in the cookbook at somewhere I can't remember where I put it, but that somebody might take one of these recipes and it might become part of their family, and then it would get passed down in their family, and that is the coolest
yeah,
feeling.
I love
So
it so much.
me too.
What kind of questions do you get over and over from people? Because you've got a
Uh,
lot of people who follow you. So, what kinds of questions do you get over and over?
like food related questions.
Mostly food related, yeah, but just about what you do, who you are, what you do.
Oh, where I get all my energy is the number one question I get, because and I am somebody who thrives off of goals and thrives off of being busy. So and I'm 46 years old now, so I've lived long enough that I've learned a lot of ways to live life fairly efficiently. So I can get quite a lot done in a short period of time. And those are the questions I get where people go, "How?" And I say, "Have an afternoon nap." I always have an afternoon nap. So my number one tip, if you want to be very productive, have a nap. Refuel yourself for the afternoon. I get lots of questions about canning, specifically how to, because there's people have a lot of fear, especially around pressure canning, because they've heard horror stories of them blowing up or things like that from the old days. So pressure canning related questions and curiosity questions about where we live, and because we're up in Canada and most of my viewers
Mm-hmm.
are in the United States, like 85%. So I get a lot of,
Oh,
I know, yeah. So a large, just curiosity about what it's like. And when I film in the wintertime, when it's negative 30 degrees outside, people are like, "How do you survive? How do you live?" It's like, I would die if I walked outside and it was that cold. So yeah.
that's funny. And I guess I should have asked you early on, something like, well, how did you get started down this path? What led y'all to become homesteaders or to live this lifestyle?
So it started back when I was young. When I was a kid, my mom always had a garden. She always canned. She, always cooked from scratch my whole life. So I was raised that way when I was young. We didn't have farm, but there was about a 6-month period where we had some chickens and some honeybees. And that had a huge impact on me, on my little 5-year-old brain. I loved it. And then my mom started reading me all the Laura Ingalls books and The Girl of the Limberlost and Emily of New Moon and Anne of Green Gables and all of these books that resonated with my heart about the way that I wanted to live my life. And then when I was probably about 12 years old, we went to visit some family, some distant relatives, and they lived in a cabin in the bush. and they homeschooled their kids, and the mom was an artist, and they had a big garden, and I loved it so much. And so from that moment on, my husband always said, like, I knew from the very beginning exactly what kind of life I wanted. And when my husband and I bought our first house when I was around 21 years old, I called it Butter Churn Farm, and it wasn't even acre. I had a couple chickens, started learning how to can myself and all of that, and it just developed from there until where we are now, where we have 160 acres and produce all of this food and all of that. So it was a very long journey. Started back when I was 5 years old, and then got up to this. So yeah, I never grew up on a farm or anything, but it just ignited my imagination when I was a child and carried all the way through.
Yeah. Well, I have no doubt that we could talk for hours and hours
We
and
could.
never run out of things to talk about. But I think we will just go ahead now and tell people where to, number one, find your cookbook, and number two, follow you.
All
So
right.
tell me about that.
Okay, you can find my cookbook at www.littlemountainranch.com. And I'm going to be doing a pre-sale for the next run in the next week. And then those will be available by mid-October. And I'm on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called Little Mountain Ranch, and I'm also over on Instagram at Little Mountain Ranch. So all those places.
All right. Anything I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
No, I don't think so. You covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate it so much, and I appreciate you so much. And you and Megan just did such a wonderful job with my cookbook, and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
We loved working with you.
Oh, it's wonderful.
All right, folks, you heard it. Go and discover everything that Chelsea Nicole has to offer, because you're going to learn a lot from her. And she's inspiring me to go get in the kitchen, do a little more cooking from scratch.
Awesome. Thank you, Elaine. I appreciate you having me.